Help support the Truth Cartel. Support in the moment. Super Chats. Support monthly through Patreon. Support with music. Support with merch. Click the links in the description.
One day Jesus coming back real soon. Take a look what my Jesus been through. He died for mankind, although we been cruel. Got a chance to repent, won't let it slip through. I got a dog out for Jesus like I'm his sister. When we preaching the gospel, we preach the truth. Trying to give it to an atheist, a Muslim, or a Jew, yeah. Gotta give the Lord's word and give it right, cause he's coming back one day like a thief in the night. Be ready, so hold on to God and keep your faith steady.
Yeah, Marla, this Duma made another one. I call this one an EOX's. Red rose, white ceiling. These EOs out here just keep sinning. Packed up and left, we ain't kidding. All of it dedicated to hurt feelings. Drama brewed up like a toddler's tantrum. We down with the TC, now I can't stand them. When it came to doctrine or prize traditions, didn't matter what we believe. We ain't Christians, so y'all poppin' just to yawn and say I just woke up. Yeah, we saw that all day, that woke line spent. Don't worry about it though, you may have time to repent, and even more time to grow. Yeah. Don't wanna talk doctrine, I just woke up. We can pray but you ain't saved, man. I just woke up. You can't even talk to Marla, I just woke up. Wait, did you just call me modalist? I just woke up. You can't ban me because I quit. You can't ban me because I quit. You ain't EO, you ain't EO, you ain't EO. I quit. I quit. Red rose faded, white ceiling caving. These boys claiming enlightenment with no priest in sight. It's just a lack of permission because their tradition ain't right. Bro, just whine in silence cause that's all you can do. When you cross the TC, you end up crossing the whole crew. Tradition states that we can't pray together or sing one song. Can't even say amens if the vibe feels wrong.
Hey, yo, Muller, this Duma made another one. Red rose, white ceiling.
It's cool.
I ain't gonna like this. Yeah. They call it a corner meal. Everybody mad. Yeah. I said a corner meal. Everybody mad. Yeah. Same old yo from the block. They say they in the heart, but they not. They saying that my circle just a die. Everybody hated on him, then he came back with a problem. I done spent a whole lot of time with the fathers. Doubling my prayers cause my church ain't making sense. I've been in my parents playing with the incense. When they all fell off the boat, yeah, I'm talking about the fence. I know it's a whole lot of folks that was hating. I know it's a whole lot of comforts I was faking. So I shut them folks up, icons feeling us. Always knew that I was gifted, so I had to stay patient. Taking over land, brother, tell me what's the bid. I heard you still so low, tell me what it is. You ain't keep the fast, buying no books, reading no saints, they ain't let a brother live. All I see is vision lights, candles, hundreds. If it ain't full theosis, bump the vibe, I don't want it. About to make these folks sick. They call it a corner meal. Everybody mad. I said a corner meal. Everybody mad. Yeah. Same old EO from the block. They say they in the heart, but they not. They say they in my circle just to die. Everybody laid on them, then he came back with a problem. She was rapping squad, now she wanna give it up.
1 2 1 2. Which ain't hard to do. Can you hear me?
But my ex-girl tryna make me jealous, saying that I'm moving worse. She don't know she out the church. I got me a deal, but I'm still in the name. Heard a couple folks talking like the guy big. They forgot that Jesus prayed with the Comboskini on the side. Man, I swear that these folks are so sweet. I got all this grace from the church on my mind. Diamonds on my icon, I can't see the time. All my folks for love, please don't ever
That's the boss. All right, get ready. Tonight, like and share right now. You're about to see real truth. Let the Holy Spirit move.
Everybody mad.
silence before the storm. Uh-oh, are we live? Yes, and it's another sunny day in California with that ice in the mug. Are we live? Yes, we are. We are good to go. Let me tell you guys something. Today you're in for one special treat because we want to constantly have real conversations with Eastern Orthodox. But I have gone ahead and thrown in the towel. Not that the battle's over, because I told you we started this and we're going to end it. No, I'm throwing in the towel that these people want to have honest conversations about their church and about exactly the state of their beliefs of where their church is currently at. So we've made that case, and tonight we're going to make it more, but we're not going to speak. An Eastern Orthodox of 6 years is going to speak for us. We're going to let him talk. Then I'll comment. Well, get ready, get excited, like and share if you could. This is your first time here. This is the Cartel of Truth, and I am your host, Amalar, the unapologetic apologist, the unequivocated evangelist, the poignant pundit, the uncancelable conservative. And why can't I be canceled? Well, if in the end you want to cancel me, that might be a bad idea, because then somebody might go, you're a racist, you're a bigot, because in the end I'm just a dumb Mexican. And if I am, then I should be able to be refuted very easily. Remember, as that Dyerite told Jay Dyer, bro, just go over there and destroy him and crush him. Oh, I don't want to. Oh, well, learn to want to, because if you disagree with me, then by all means you can. So when we get through with the letter, I'll open it up and have you guys come on. But we have unfinished and a mission and actual business tonight, because we want to examine this now internally as to what happens when you go from ortho bro to 5-6 years in as an Eastern Orthodox. And tonight is going to be a very, very special look behind the curtain to find out what exactly happens. And we got to thank God that people like this are being honest about their faith. So buckle up and enjoy, because this is not a video. It's going to be me reading this particular Eastern Orthodox's blog, or I'm sorry, what do they call it? His Substack. And then we'll go from there. And I'd like for you guys to be ready to throw in your opinions as I ask you some questions as we move through this document and this testimony. So I hope you're excited and get ready, because you're going to have to give some opinion. So let's get right into it, shall we? Let's dive in to the testimony. All right, so it's always been said that we want to have honest conversations on this platform, but as you can see, I don't think the other party, or at least the ortho bros, are interested. So what we have to do is we have to have conversations with other Eastern Orthodox, true Eastern Orthodox. And what better way to do that than to have somebody who just tells us the truth? Tells us the truth about his experience. Again, this is anecdotal, but I want to tell you where this comes in into my world, where my anecdotal experience combines with Edwin Robinson, and this is his Substack. And the title of this article is, I've been Orthodox for over 5 years. In other words, going on to 6 years, how I'm feeling now. Now, this is a perfect snapshot, because right around 2018, really 2019, is when somebody like Jay Dyer became popular and started to really, really gather the ortho bro. So the last 5 or 6 years, this is built up. The height of it, I think, was about 1.5 years ago. And now we're seeing the downward trend of this explosion of people being interested in orthodoxy. So the reason this is important is because it gives us a great snapshot and a perspective. Again, this is not everyone. But I'll tell you what I know this happened, or what the commonality is between my anecdotal experience and his. I know of people in the Discord world, in the online world, that very much agree with what he's saying. Then I know people in the real life, in the Earl world, in real life, that are currently going through what exactly he's describing. And I want you to really be open-minded about what we're about to hear, but at the same time, there is critiques within them, and this person's pretty harsh against evangelicalism, which is where he came out of. So we're going to assess everything. There's only a portion that I'm going to skip here, and the portion that I'm going to skip, chat, is going to be the part where he talks about his association or orthodoxy's association or their long history with Russia, and how he kind of just says that that's never really interested him. So if you're okay, chat, I want to see if you really do have a question in the middle of this, that you do maybe put it in caps if you think it's important. If not, you guys chat it up, and then I'll be asking you questions as we move forward through this. All right? So let's get cracking. This is, again, the brother's name is Edwin Robinson. Okay? He says, it's been over 6 years since I jumped into Orthodox Christianity. In spring of 2020, Orthodoxy caught my interest, my spiritual sensitivities heightened in the midst of the COVID mania and the evangelical congregation I attended at the time being shut down. Very, very common story. I read a lot of books, studied, prayed, and started attending a local Orthodox parish. I was baptized in January 2021, and I've continued going there to this day. I've written previously about how and why I became Orthodox. I've written so clearly about where I am now. What's changed? How have my thoughts about things evolved now that the novelty has long since worn off? Today, I'll attempt to answer that. Back in 2020, in the early years, in general, I consumed a vast amount of Orthodox content and media. In fact, let me pause here. If you guys are already starting to hear this story that either happened to you or to somebody you know, that this is exactly how it happens. They dive in, they start eating a lot of the content. Just go ahead, and anytime you see something that you agree with, or I pause, drop a 1 in the chat if you agree. If you know of somebody or if this happened to you. So I personally stop here because back in 2017, my testimony when I came back to the Lord, I was struggling for years prior to that to really commit to the Lord. And I could tell you a little bit about that. This is back in the day when Jay Dyer didn't really exist on the internet. I think he started to pop up on YouTube like 2017, 2018. There was a guy, the only Orthodox guy that I would see would come up on the feed was this guy called this priest, and I think he's in Europe somewhere in England. His name was Father Spiridon. And he still does have these 12-minute messages where you don't really get the hint that it's Eastern Orthodox. He talks about the fathers, and he talks about it in a certain way, but in general, it's just like a pithy, positive message. So I started to catch him. He would be a part of my feed, and every so often I would click those videos. I'll say this. I probably shared those videos with some other people saying in general, I didn't really have anything against it. He was talking about Christianity, not knowing what Eastern Orthodoxy was kind of then, even as I shared it. So, but that's what happened. And by the time you get to 2020, more content is readily available, and it's mainly going to be Jay Dyer and a much more aggressive content, right, towards converting, refutation, argumentation. So this is around this time where it starts to pop off where he's at. It says, I was eager to learn theology, history, patristics, you name it. This is a pretty common experience for the inquirer / convert, especially in the current era. There's a heavy emphasis on more rigorously analytical and theological aspects of orthodoxy. The problem was that eventually I hit the point of diminishing returns. I understand what I believe as an Orthodox Christian and why I believed it. So I didn't have much interest in going further into theological specifics. Now, this is kind of common, but I'll be honest with you, most of the time at the beginning parts of the first year or two, they're really in the Eastern Orthodox universe. They've jumped all in, and some people get really, really obsessed to the point where they think the Orthodox Church teaches you to begin to evangelize or to debate aggressively. And many sort of Orthodox that I've talked to over the years, a lot of them would be catechumens, inquirers, and I would say, well, bro, your first act in trying to spread orthodoxy is you're rebelling against your own church. You have no permission to do this. You can't be telling me what you think a certain church father says. You have no authority to do that. But if you want to have this conversation and you want to dive into what you think this scripture says, what you think this says, we can do it. But I'm telling you, you're already violating your church's policy. So it's kind of funny how that works, right? They're really super pumped up about this tradition, and the first thing they do is dog the tradition. But anyways, some of them don't care. They would They would go off or they would want to continue to debate. So I'll continue here. It says, I had no desire to debate Roman Catholics, with whom I have vanishingly few connections or conflicts in the overwhelmingly evangelical world in which I live. And evangelical friends, family, and acquaintances didn't care about my pivot towards orthodoxy, let alone particularly challenge me on much of anything. Now, this is also true. So there's people that I know of in real life, obviously, and then also through Discord that have essentially found themselves in the same sort of corner. That they go around trying to convert people to orthodoxy, evangelicals, and evangelicals' overwhelming numbers just don't care. Now, why is it that they don't care? Well, I'll give you a clue. Typically, when somebody is going to receive a message that's outside their church or something that they're comfortable with, they need to see the benefits sort of manifesting in front of them, right? But what ends up happening is that the person, at least through this recent adaptation of evangelism, in other words, through argumentation, I'll tear down your current position and hope that in fear that you have, I drive you to try to find the truth that I have, and therefore I can convince you to come to orthodoxy. Now, I don't know if you know, but eventually what happens is people begin to ask questions and understand and figure out this sort of tactic, right? And it works initially on some folks that don't have questions, but eventually that wears off. In other words, they need to see real practical reasons as to why they should adopt what you've picked up. So tearing them down and then saying what I have is true only works for so long. And eventually you got to get to the point where you give them that reason. So this is why at times you'll see people go, bro, I'm not really interested in that. So he goes on to say, not wanting to be an annoying convert who starts arguments with people, but that's typically what happens within this first year. I'd learned how to defend what I believed. On here, I'll occasionally write an article touching on that sort of thing, but didn't really need to go much past that. People I know in real life, especially outside my parish, don't really read my writing on here. And that may be true. Sounds like he has an interesting path. I checked out one of his other articles, and so I think the brother's sincere. It says, at any rate, I barely buy Orthodox books now. Now, remember, this is 5 years in. He says, I don't listen to a lot of Orthodox content on YouTube or podcasts anymore. And what I do consume tends to be more related toward pastoral topics or the daily grind of spiritual life than stuff related to complex theology or apologetics. Now, I'll let you know that there's a couple people that I know that have really dove into orthodoxy, and they live it through their parish, through their priest, their spiritual father. In fact, they don't touch a lot of these complex areas here because they're actually living the life of an Eastern Orthodox person. Okay? What they're called to do, right? So this modern day thing that you see, let me debate you. Your worldview sucks and mine's great. That's not how orthodoxy has spread over the centuries, at least in the modern centuries. That's a recent development by a person who wanted to come out and essentially dunk on people and show that they have something superior. And really, it was a Catholic sort of a theological debate tactic that kicked this off, along with some Protestants. The Protestants is the foundation. The reason I say this is because you got to understand that what we're seeing is a cyclical behavior by the quote-unquote American or the internet consumer worldwide. So if something begins to dominate your algorithm or you start to see it, you begin to investigate it or believe it outright. Why? Just because the clips are, these clips are like, they're crazy, bro. You should see this person. He asked him, how do you know Matthew wrote Matthew? And the dude was stunned. And then there they go. They have enough information to be curious or to move. And so here's what I'm going to ask you, chat. If this is something that you have fell into, or you know of people that fell into this and sort of just bit this, just drop a 1 in the chat. Be honest. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you don't know. Maybe you don't know the internet world as I do. And I'm not popping my collar. I'm just simply saying is you might not know that this is what's happening in the internet world. So let me continue here. He says this combination of several factors. I'm sorry. We go back here. It says, at any rate, I barely buy Orthodox books now. Sorry. I don't know why I'm having trouble with that. I don't listen to a lot of Orthodox content on YouTube or podcasts anymore. And what I do consume tends to be more related toward pastoral topics or the daily grind of spiritual life than stuff related to complex theology or apologetics. This is a combination of several factors. Laziness on my part. Yeah. Exhaustion with the various Orthodox personalities on new media platforms, many of whom I now simply find annoying at this point, and the realization that lots of head knowledge wasn't and couldn't make me a better person. That is absolute facts. So if I speak to the person that's been Orthodox roughly 4 or 5 years or more, they're not enamored anymore by Jay Dyer. They kind of go, bro, like, and I some of his stuff was definitely fun, but now I don't see that that's actually real Orthodoxy. That's just a fact. But other things too, dunking on people, cussing people out, and then telling them, going like, how did Matthew wrote Matthew, and then lacing that in, and then pretending like that's, what a burn. I got you with that one. It wears off. And this is, again, something I'm experiencing in real life and on the internet. It says, in another sense, though, I think I got burned out by the sort of culture that emerged in the online convert sphere of orthodoxy, or what could be considered ortho bro culture. Now, let's just be honest. If there wasn't no ortho bro culture, this person wouldn't have heard about orthodoxy. You feel what I'm saying, chat? Am I right about it, chat? Well, okay, just go ahead. I went to an Orthodox parish years ago. This was probably, I want to say, after the economic collapse, the housing crisis. This was like 2009 maybe. And I'm just like, hey, somebody told me that they go there. I was like, I'll go check it out on a Sunday. Never would have known. After that, I don't know and can't remember of any, let's say, market or local place or an evangelist that was on the side saying I go in so-and-so parish. Never heard that. Never seen it. Wouldn't know. Right? So this is basically how most of the converts that are coming in. And I said up to 90%, and some EOs laughed at me. And of course, we found out that they were lying, because they indeed came through the internet as well. It says the endless videos of dense theological topics. I'm sorry, did I skip here? Yeah, I think I did. All right, so I finished here. It says, in another sense, though, I think I got burned out in the sort of culture that emerged in the online convert sphere of orthodoxy, or what would be considered ortho bro culture. The endless videos of dense theological topics and apologetics seems reflective of the tendency of Western rationalism to turn orthodoxy into a tidy intellectual system. Now, that's facts. Very much so. The intellectual system was actually stolen and borrowed an argument from Protestantism. That's kind of a good amount of the framework. In other words, they've seen the success of having sort of this systematic theology that the Reformation or, the Reform bros prior to them had. And they wanted to make a new system where they can make a system of argumentation and break down how each of these points leads you to orthodoxy. It says, with an essentially systematized theology constructed out of patristic texts and other sources, in a manner that really just fits orthodoxy into the same kind of overly tidy container as you'd find Roman Catholicism, Calvinism, or Lutheranism, to give some examples. That's actually perfectly summed up. As it turns out, highly individualistic Western male nerds have something of a tendency to take orthodoxy and reframe it in the way that suits their particular intellectual and cultural proclivities. Now, this is facts. A lot of the common personalities of the people that are going through this are very much, call them quote unquote nerds. Not in a bad way, like, they're like geeks or dorks, that's the way they process information. So they are, in a sense, now that they're part of orthodoxy, they're having to reprogram themselves because they are very individualistic people. They're independent thinkers. They pride themselves on seeing things from a certain angle. But with that comes, undoubtedly pride. But pride, is in all of us. It says, now sometimes left-leaning progressive Orthodox people will use this as a sort of retort to defend their own antics. You're just opposed to the LG agenda because you wrapped an orthodox veneer over your right-wing reactionary box. Unlike I believe in the authentic and totally inclusive orthodoxy, which is vastly sillier. Regardless, there is merit to the idea that heavily intellectualized converts often miss the whole point of orthodoxy and reframe it in a way that it becomes a weapon in their toolbox, so to speak, more than a way of life. Now that right there perfectly sums up exactly what you're seeing. W take. Chat, if you can't see that orthodoxy, and this is why I've always said real Orthodox that I speak to who are not ortho bros, have this properly assessed, the way of life of Eastern Orthodoxy. Now, you don't have to take my word for it. Go talk to your priest. Go talk to your spiritual father at your parish. They're going to tell you the same thing. They're going to tell you what you see online is not what we actually do. So then why is it that we're having even this discussion? Well, we're having it because this cultural movement has taken or took a majority of the internet conversation over. And what he's saying is, I eventually got over that. However, he says the other end of ortho bro culture is represented by those guys who go extremely hardcore into the practices rather than or in addition to the theology. Now, this is fact. I find fewer of these guys, though. Far fewer. 90% of them are the ortho bro. Let me debate me, bro. And then maybe 10, 15% I found that go ascetic, go really, really hardcore into the ritual practices and become very, very calm and humble and really want to do this, what he says. For this type, fasting and this prayer services and consuming vast amounts of relevant literature comes rather naturally. For me, however, it does not. And attempting to try this route quickly led to burnout and disappointment. It is also worth noting that the lay person, the super ascetic bro, is almost always a single guy. That is facts. Even the typical ortho bro today is typically single. And if they're not, they're young and married. And I'll just keep it a buck. Most of the times their wife, their superiors, their bosses don't know how ortho bro they get online. In other words, what I'm saying is if you were to meet these people in reality and actually deal with them and talk to them, doing business with them or meeting them at your church or whatever, they would not act like how they act online. So they put up this facade, this act, because most of this is internet driven. And as you know, internet can sometimes just be, as Trump would put it, fake news. It's not real. So they can act this way. But if their children, let's say their young marriages, their wife heard them sounding and acting like this towards other people, they would probably go, wait a minute, what are you doing? Like, what are we doing here? You're a grown man. You're acting like you're playing Xbox with somebody, but you're yelling at them over, their God or whatever. And this can happen if you're not engaged in debate. These are not people that are signed up for this. They're just regular Joes. And he's a regular Joe that's writing this. But always a single guy. And he says, and thus encumbered by the unending practical challenges of family life, especially family life with multiple babies or toddlers, which is my situation. So this is a regular Joe. He says he might grumble about not being able to find a wife, which is also typical. Now, I'm going to tell you how that ties in. But really, if he were actually to marry and have kids, this would dramatically sabotage his ability to pursue the Orthodox lifestyle. So chat, have you noticed, and I've said this, and a couple of other prominent YouTubers, Christian YouTubers have said the same thing. So chat, I want to see if you agree with this sentiment. And you could put a 1 if you do or 2 if you don't. What you're seeing in the ortho bro culture is essentially retired or rejects from the online movement. Would you say yes or no to that? Would you say yes or no to that? That's where you have to ask yourself, when you've seen this culture take over, where did it come from? Where did these guys go and you remember the red pills? Yeah, I gotta find a wife. I work out 6 times a day. Well, they had to take that energy and put it somewhere else. because they were working out so that they can go hit their mixed martial arts, or their Y, where they go play basketball. They get to, sort of dunk on people there, whatever. And now they harnessed all that energy and put it into, I'm going to dunk on you in debate. So this is what he's describing. And this is my experience. They're just ex-red pillars. That's what we're witnessing. And he says, my interest in orthodoxy was motivated by all sorts of things. But it's hard to deny that one of them was the fact that it gave me the framework to potentially treat my faith like one of my weird OCD male nerd hobbies. I figured that being able to do that would sustain my faith in a way that I was never able to in the vague, subjective world of the evangelical practice. In a way, it did, at least at certain times. But here's the thing. My interest in my OCD nerd hobbies ebbs and flows. And once I had put together my ultimate prayer corner in the shelf of Orthodox books, I found myself losing a bit of motivation since I didn't have quantifiable goals to work toward, just much more difficult, unfun spiritual ones, where I wasn't seeing much progress, just continual repetitive discouragement. Dealing with constant disappointment and failure is just sort of the nature of this whole thing. So learning to manage the feelings around that is, practically speaking, a critical step for the modern American convert. This is facts. But this is what we talked about. These cultural movement, these cycles, we've seen it on the internet. They used to last 5, 6, 7, 8 years. Now they're lasting 3 years. So they're going to get shorter. That's the thing where you people are on something new. You ever check with that person and they're on something new? Like, oh, I'm doing this now. And typically the internet is driving this sort of activity, right? This is what's happening. So when a regular Joe here, as he said, can be an OCD nerd, steps into this world, he has some different priorities, some different responsibilities than the ex-red pillar. So what we're looking at is reality of somebody who stepped into the Orthodox world that is planning to sustain it throughout his life. Because even an ex-red pillar will eventually lose it. They might stay in the faith, still be a Christian, they just won't practice it as focused. So he says, but anyway, as a result, things started to get boring. I didn't have more books that I needed to read. And instead of edifying me, Orthodox content just made me feel more upset. I've been through the whole yearly cycle of service over and over again, so there wasn't much new to experience, aside from something like going on pilgrimage to distant monasteries, which for various reasons isn't particularly viable right now. Well, it costs money. Now, this is the section where he goes into this tangent about talking about Russia, because the actual church, has a deep history. But he says he's really not interested in that angle of orthodoxy. So he moves on to many drop out. Now, I want you to pay attention to what's about to happen. He says, it's been surprising, or maybe not really surprising, just how many people I've known from my parish have dropped out, stopped going to church, leaving orthodoxy altogether, or converting to something else. Others brimming with initial enthusiasm just disappeared with no real explanation. Now, I'm going to tell you that's what I witnessed online. Like what'll happen is you'll see them again. They might, carry, have the Orthodox cross thing, or they might hold it. But when they come in to have a conversation, they actually don't even want to talk about Orthodoxy. They just want to hang out, or they want to talk about maybe some major doctrines in Christianity or politics or something else, because they've grown up and they've moved on. It says, that's the thing about Orthodoxy, he says. At least in my experience, it exerts a very loose grip on you. If you want to leave, walk away, drop out, you don't get much in the way of pushback. You can disappear and nobody really seems to care. It's that better than a toxic, controlling environment where you can't leave, where psychological manipulation pressure keeps you in the fold, ? Well, yeah, it is, but regardless, something about this is a little troubling. You can get the sense that if you're not sufficiently enthusiastic, you'll slip through the cracks. In 6 years in Orthodoxy, I haven't really gotten better. In 6 years of Orthodoxy, I'll repeat, I haven't really gotten better. He goes on to say something even more powerful. at all. Are you guys listening to this? Now, this isn't a knock. Let's not sit here and act like we can't go to Catholic tradition, a Protestant tradition, evangelicals, and have the same issue. So I'm not knocking him for this. But there's a very specific thing that he's done. He's given himself altogether to this. And he's saying at all. In other words, there's not really a place where he could point a finger to saying there's an improvement here. He's saying in totality and completely. And I want you to look at this because this is often what we're going to see, as a brother in the Discord pointed out. It's that cognitive dissonance that kicks in. And you're going to see right now, he's about to take you to the sort of the depths of his issues. And then later he kind of corrects it. And the very same thing he's complaining about, he wants to praise as possibly the better part. So it's this give and take. And it's very, very common that I see it when I speak to them. They're inconsistent. But anyways, he says, I think I've become worse in almost every aspect. You talked about what the heck? Every aspect, he says. Every aspect. If anything, it's just highlighted how much worse I am than my prior, already negative opinion of myself in most regards, and seems to have contributed directly to my general psychological state, which could be often generally described as depressed. Now, I told you before that I know of IRL in real life folks that this is absolutely the case. And it starts with what you're going to see him talking about. It eventually becomes outside of the parish an isolationist type of existence. Not because you want to be isolated, but because people around you are essentially going, all right, either you're scaring them off or they're just knowing that you at one point have been hostile towards them and they're kind of just leaving you be and waiting to see the fruit of what it is you claim to be the true church. This is honestly what I've heard several times. I've often wondered, was this worth it? Would I be better off at the day of judgment being a naive evangelical than a lousy Orthodox failing to stop even the most basic of sinful behaviors? Maybe. It's a bit hard to say. I often feel like the whole thing has just given me more rope with which to hang myself. What can be done? What can be additionally frustrating on this point is that when I raise such concerns with my clergy, the answers I get back feel an awful lot like gaslighting. No, you're not getting. No, you are getting better. Sorry. No, you are getting better. You just can't see it. This might be enough for some people, but I have a much higher than average self-awareness, such that I'm quite aware whether things are or aren't the case in regards to myself. Now, this is common in Christianity as well. So don't think that this particular person is describing something that we don't see, with new converts or newer folks that are coming to Christ. But typically what we see is with these converts that were ex-red pillars, a lot of them were ex-atheists. And during this cultural movement, they got, let's say, dunked on by a person who used let's say basic philosophical arguments and tied it to Christianity and said, hey, you know how I schooled you today? I did it because I'm a Christian. I'm a Catholic or I'm Eastern Orthodox. And then that particular atheist starts to go, okay, they got basically a silver bullet argument, right? So then you get this militant atheist that moves over. You've seen that. I've talked to a few of them. And that's why they're so aggressive at times. And so what he's pointing out here is that this type of personality is what's drawing a most of the Eastern Orthodoxy, not just initially, but keeping them there. The ones that do stay have a certain type of personality. He's about to jump into it. You're going to find this fascinating because I would like for you to check out where you are on this spectrum of personality. Now, I want to tell you guys something. I'm gonna share something personal a little bit later. But I want to tell you guys that this particular chapter of Eastern Orthodoxy, with us discussing this, may have to come to a close because I think in the next week or so, we're going to see much revealing testimony like this, which puts a proper light to essentially the faith decision that you have to make, whether initially coming to Christianity or of inquiring to another tradition. Let me get back to this. He says essentially that he knows how to assess himself. So when his clergy tells him, calm down, you're getting better, he's kind of like, no, I'm not. Of course, I easily might overlook or miss my flaws or things that I'm doing wrong, but I'm likely to miss when I'm doing something right. But I'm likely to miss when I'm doing something right, especially when I'm only interacting with a priest at church 1 or 2 times a week. Now, this is huge because this pretty much grounds the average true Orthodox, and I say it that way in terms of a person who's living out their faith respectfully, humbly under a spiritual father or the parish level. It says what I'm experiencing is decided not. What I am experiencing is decided not what you often see in Orthodox literature, where some obviously very holy guy thinks he's the worst of sinners, but of some utterly inconsequential thing like pouring a slightly fuller cup of tea for himself than the other monks. I know I'm likely reading too much between the lines, but this kind of rhetorical often comes across, I think he meant rhetoric, across as jumping through some hoops as a roundabout way of feeling satisfied with yourself while circumventing more obviously Pharisaical pride. Now he's just trying to point out that, not everybody comes in with this hyper attention to I'm holier than thou and I'm trying to get to those levels. But however, it plays a part. It says, as a result, it's hard for me not to roll my eyes when I hear my clergy, monks, etc. make self-effacing comments because it can come across as sort of obligatory posturing. It's rather more convincing when they take a more low-key tact of just politely nodding when somebody compliments them or whatever, and then moving on and not going into the whole I'm so awful thing. So on this topic, he says, I've had numerous experiences of meeting somebody regarded by everybody else as insanely holy, or reading their books or listening to them teach or whatever, and feeling basically nothing. Of thinking this is just a guy or lady. Yeah, I met with some nice people who clearly have some spiritual quality about them, like my godmother. But it's not such a vast night and day difference as hyperzealous converts seem to make it out to be. Now he gets into the other side of it, the tyranny of monastic rule. Hands down, the biggest friction I've had with orthodoxy has been what I might call monastic tyranny, wherein the writings of musings of elder so-and-so are treated as an infallible rule when he goes off on very particular notions of how you shouldn't have any fun, do anything enjoyable, have sex with your wife, unless you run through a labyrinthine checklist, and so on. But I want to point something out. What you guys are about to hear now is something that you probably haven't heard, and it's regards to how the church tells you to live in your marriage sexually. This was one of the eye-openers, and he says that nobody tells you about this. It's coming up a little bit later. This says the subtext tends to be that if you're enjoying anything other than standing in church services or you're very nearly sinning, then you're very nearly sinning, if not explicitly sinning. And really, you shouldn't be enjoying church services anyways, because that probably also means you're doing it wrong. This was a bit hard to see coming when I was an inquirer. This only really becomes apparent as you spend a lot of time in orthodoxy. There can be a lot of, I hate to use the term as abused and misused as it can be by evangelicals, legalism. Wait, what? So now Eastern Orthodox are using descriptions that evangelicals use to assess their current state. So when we're talking about legalism, enjoyment's not holy, and he'll get to a little bit of that a little bit later. Legalism is something that we use. They look at you sideways and say, what? What is this? Like, we're not Pharisees. This is not legalism. But now he's starting to catch the flow. It says that can come off across as self-serving, or at least not very self-aware. Musings of monastics trying to up heavy burdens to be borne by their rapt listeners that are basically easy or natural for monastics to follow in their life situation, but difficult or impossible for those of us with families to deal with, yet often indiscriminately applied to the latter category regardless. In other words, he's just laying out. He's a regular dude with the wife and kids. And what sometimes he feels pressured is to live a life that's going to be impossible considering that what the scripture tells us to do. You know, if a man doesn't work, he doesn't eat. We have to guide our household, yes, but we can't be completely devoted to, let's say, church life or the parish, nor do they ask you to do that. There has to be a balance. He says, I am reacting here more to modern day teachings and musings by Orthodox figures rather than ancient ones. Again, in keeping with my general affection for every ancient desert and church fathers over more modern ones. He says, I thought orthodoxy would lead to some dramatic transformation in my environment, that those around me would be drawn to it. That didn't happen. Now, I'll sadly tell you that the people that I know, again, personally, my anecdotal evidence has left them quite isolated. Not on purpose, not because Catholics or evangelicals hate them. It's just what naturally happens when you dive in to such deep, rich, but demanding sort of view of Christian or monastic practices that are kind of, being told to you in the modern church. A super, very, very deep commitment to your local parish. He says that didn't happen. So people are not drawn to it. Now, some of that is certainly a failure on my part to actually live up to the ideals of it, which is pretty normal. But in 5 years, I made absolutely no progress in getting my wife, children, or other family members to care at all or to give it even the most curious consideration. I've noticed that this is extremely common. He's absolutely right. That's a W take right there. This is really common. For married couples with children, it's almost always the husband who expresses interest in orthodoxy, and the rest of the family either immediately converts with him or simply does not care. This often leads to tension and eventually family breakup and divorce. I've been only in 1 or 2 cases out of the many where the wife who didn't convert with her husband and kids later converted. I know more cases which ended in divorce. I sadly know of 1 case of that myself. Now, you know what's crazy is that sometimes they're coping. Sometimes they don't know that that was the case. And that's unfortunate. But you can clearly see it, and they probably sometimes will never let that be the reason. They'll say it was other things. But the wives get concerned when they run to something so deeply and then want to sort of force it on others. So he says, many in the Orthodox convert sphere harbor fantasies of America and the West becoming Orthodox en masse or something like that. But short of society collapses, a strongman war world assumes power and restores order. Said strongman then converts to orthodoxy, which granted is a scenario with historical precedents. I don't see it happening. The problem is that Westerners in general and Americans in particular are just too culturally antithetical to the demands of orthodoxy for it to plausibly take hold, short of some dramatic upheaval, which is certainly in play. The degree of rigorism and asceticism demanded by orthodoxy, especially the hardcore roadcore variety, is simply too at odds with Western European nature and the culture it produced for it to have mass appeal. So I want to pause here, chat. I want to show you how already culturally what is being required by their particular church, especially something like roadcore or some of the more hardcore churches that we see, right, within Eastern Orthodoxy, doesn't match up with what we're seeing in the ortho bro culture. In other words, these Westerns, these Americans, these loudmouth Americans ended up becoming Orthodox and think that they can bring their same thing evangelical tendencies over to orthodoxy. And this is exactly the conversation that I've had with them. The whole time, and whether you think so or not, the debate has been, at least for me the last couple of years, is that it's the same thing. Now, I know in the end, there's different views of, the Eucharist baptism and all these things, but in the end, it is the same thing. What is the same thing? Eastern Orthodoxy, when you go through it, depending upon what century you're in, but really what church you're in, or your modernist view, a more exclusivist view, anti-ecumenist view, or ecumenist view, whatever you want to flip-flop those things, you can get any one person to be able to pitch you the version that they believe. Chrismation, mandatory baptism, all of this. And that is, you get to come and pick and choose. So guess what happened? Somebody like Jay Dyer pulled up to the Antiochian church and goes, that's going a little too ecumenist for me, so I'm going to drop that and go to ROCOR. Same thing. I've even asked Eastern Orthodox whether they could leave. Let's just say they found OCA to be better. And by the way, the brother here in this particular article is ROCOR. And he's going to talk about considering that option. But my whole point in explaining to you sort of the landscape is that when it comes down to it, you actually can make these moves, sort of create in your own mind. You don't have the authority to do it. A version of orthodoxy that you think is the most palatable for your inner or your social circle. Or, get this, even better, for you to mouth off online. Now, it reminds me of the person that I ended up talking to on one of these gaming platforms that was hardcore, basically talking Eastern Orthodoxy. We were preaching the gospel, and he chimed in, and they began a debate in front of the unbelievers. We're preaching the gospel. He turned it into an orthodoxy thing. So then I quickly asked him, I said, bro, what are you? Are you a catechumen? And he said, yeah. And I said, well, have you been baptized yet? And he goes, no. I was like, bro, you're out of order. You can't be talking right now. Does your priest know this? And he's like, well, he tried to lie to me, like we've seen others online, that they don't have explicit, they don't know, their priest doesn't know that they're going in hostily trying to take over convos and turn it into orthodoxy. So he tried to lie, and eventually he said no. And I said, then go get it. Go get your priest's permission. So we didn't do the joint evangelism thing with that person. However, that person some months later came back with a much different attitude. That person humbly came back and said, hey, I know we got off on the wrong foot, but you were right about some things because I needed to be properly taught and properly come under, my spiritual father, and I needed to do things correctly. And I said, oh, bro, I was just telling you for your own good, because I know that what you're going to do is you're going to try to teach people this or pitch people this. You don't have the permission. And what you're doing is you're not even approaching it the way they do. And now, from what I last saw in an interaction, this was some months ago, he actually doesn't approach unbelievers that way or is so aggressive to jump into it. That's just another experience where I'm showing that what you see online is not real orthodoxy. And that's the point of this particular Substack article. You have to take these things in. And so experiencing at a local level outside the internet, it's going to be two different experiences. So he tells us what the problem is. Then he also says the problem is that Westerners in general, the Americans in particular, are just too culturally antithetical to the demands of orthodoxy. I already read that part. Evangelicalism is the de facto Christianity of Americans because it's the lowest common denomination faith. Now, this is kind of like this pejorative language that they use. But unfortunately for this brother, even if he is in ROCOR, I don't know if you know this, but you might watch this. Brother, your church agrees that the lowest common denomination of the faith is actually in Christendom. Now, that's what you got to deal with. I don't have to deal with that. You have to deal with that. And this is something that you have to learn. It has no foundation for any sort of spiritual depth, but it's easy to market and propagate. It harmonizes with Western character, in cultures like Greece and Russia, where orthodoxy has been interwoven with the entire societal fabric for over 1,000 years, it possesses a sort of cultural inertia, but there's no such situation in the West. Now, here's where I want to push back. If you go to some of these countries, if you know somebody in Greece, and I know of a couple people that are in the server, right, that grew up, they're not Orthodox, meaning they're not practicing. They say that most of the temperature in Greece is that those that claim to be Orthodox are essentially born into it, but that most don't practice it, that their attitude is very much the Westerner attitude towards it. It's kind of something where they see the church, they see it, it's not the, rose-colored glasses. So it's not like when he describes Greece or Russia that they're all walking around super dedicated to their faith in that way. It's more of what we'd call cultural Christians that we find Protestantism and Catholicism here in the West. So don't think that because they have this 1,000-year history that right now there's, this taking over. It's just happening in America where people are really interested in orthodoxy because of the internet. But you go to Greece, there's not this pop-off because it's already there. And a lot of people will treat it as sort of a pastime. Okay, it's not this overwhelming devotion is my point. The fact is, he says, orthodoxy attracts a very particular sort of person with a certain set of proclivities well outside of the mainstream cultural impulse of America as a whole. That is true. However, the orthobro impulse, whether manifested in the form of rowdy, reactionary young men or tightly disciplined families, seems to reflect impulses that once upon a time manifested in puritanical or Calvinistic manifestations, but are now filtered through an orthodox lens. Right here. W-tape. It's been my opinion and others, as we talked about the red pill culture that have just kind of moved over. There was another Christian movement. They called it, I think, Restless Reformed or something like that. That had its period where prior to 2019, they had, they had a catalog on that joint. It was like 2009 to like 2000, probably, maybe I would say 2016, 2017. Young Restless Reform. There you go. So you have red pill and you have young ex-Calvinists that have come to this particular movement. And I can prove it to you. Even though Jonathan Pajot is not a young guy, he was very much approaching and coming to have a conversation with Gavin Ortland from you're a Calvinist. I used to be a Calvinist. Calvinism, right? So it's this bad taste in their mouth from this soteriological view that turned into, I need to find this new, or this, this ecclesiology or this view of salvation in the church, that where I have an absolute way to refute, or the antithesis or the opposite of this view, I can then be a proponent, defend it, and say, see, Calvinism bad. Now, my viewpoint. I don't agree with Calvinism. I don't think that folks that believe it are going to hell. I think it becomes very problematic when those folks start to point fingers and say other people are going to hell if they don't believe in Calvinism, because not even Luther or Calvin taught that. Luther and Calvin taught that they believed that there were still Christians in Eastern Orthodoxy and Catholicism. So see how that goes. Even if you look at Calvinism, we're going to touch on this in a second, and say, but it's consigning people to hell because of the double predestination aspect. Well, yeah, but at the same time, even if I were to make that case and just, caricature like that and have no defense, they still are having a broad net of salvation, because they say Protestants can be saved, Catholics can be saved, Orthodox can be saved. It's a real broad net. We're going to get to how this plays out when Eastern Orthodox move from Calvinism over there. So this was perfectly put. He says, as a result, you have parishes like mine seemingly exploding with growth, largely sparked by guys watching videos by social media personalities. Facto. But here's the thing. Outside of my parish, nobody I know is familiar with orthodoxy. That is facts. Or cares at all. Out of the hundreds of evangelicals I knew from before I started attending my parish, I don't know a single one who has converted to orthodoxy or shown any interest in it. That's facts. You know why? Because they're living life. They're not on the internet. I don't know a single one who has converted to Orthodoxy or shown any interest in it. This fact makes me extremely skeptical of the idea that people are really mass converting to Orthodoxy, despite the fact that lots of new faces are constantly showing up at parishes around the country. Maybe a notable percentage of above average intelligence male nerds is converting, but the trend I've noticed is that a lot of these guys don't have much else going on in their lives. Whoa, that is also a fact. I don't have a lot of confidence that anything we're doing is going to positively move or influence the culture. If anything, the bad rep of converts seems to be doing quite the opposite. The best case scenario at present seems to be Orthodoxy existing as a sort of self-contained subculture. Now, I just want to say, if I left it right there and ended the show, you'd be good, because that is a fact. It says, he goes on to say, the other factor is that I don't see normal patterns of reproduction going on. Few of the single guys have found girlfriends or gotten married. They're all cradle Orthodox. There are cradle Orthodox girls around, but most of them are in middle school or teenagers. I strongly doubt they'd have any interest in nerdy convert guys, even if they were a few years older. There simply aren't enough girls around ortho bro convert guys, and only a very small percentage of said guys are interested in becoming monks. Facto. Now, I want to point something out. This is why you had these people in this phenomenon, right? Like Jay Dyer, where he would pull up and he'd say, "You want to find a wife? Oh, go ahead, go to a nice coffee shop outside these evangelical churches and open up your Eastern Orthodox Bible and go ahead and get their attention." In other words, pull up the evangelicals, churches like creeps, and try to land a chick there. Right? That's the advice that was given. Remember, a lot of these are ex-red pillars, OCD guys that have pulled up to this. Now, I don't knock them for that. I'm saying is it's good that they've come to find Christ, but what they're going to find is what this gentleman had to eventually admit to, that what they got into online wasn't reality. So he says, the most viable pattern seems to be guys who start coming to church with their existing girlfriends or wives. Okay, let me go back here. It says, interestingly, there are some girls who have been attending or converted, but I rarely see single guys interact with them at all. The most viable pattern seems to be guys who start coming to church with their existing girlfriends or wives, which leads to my next point. Oh, wow. Let me play something for you guys. We need to read this with the proper music. You need to pay attention to what I'm about to read or what he's about to tell us, because this might be the single fact that helps you keep your relationship together, a happy home, and not lead to what he said a good number of people he knew ended up in divorce, meaning a higher percentage than those that worked out. He says, don't convert alone. Here's my spiciest take. If you are married, you should not convert to Orthodoxy unless your spouse is as enthusiastic about it as you are. Out of at least 8 families I know of, excluding myself, only 1 has ended up with the wife eventually converting to Orthodoxy. 3 are married, but with the wife not attending. Pursuit of Orthodoxy can often feel like a bit of vain pursuit, done to the exclusion of time or effort that could be exerted toward my family or other pressing considerations. In general, Orthodoxy is a very introverted, introspective, self-absorbed manner of Christianity. That is fact, if that's the way you live it. It says, which is perhaps a bit surprising given its Eastern orientation and grounding in cultures that are more group community-oriented than our individualistic one. But not surprising in the sense that much of Orthodox spiritual patristic originates a solitary, monastic life. Take this as advice from a man who's been there. That might be one of the most important things you hear if you are considering or inquiring. Remember, he's going to give you this advice yet again later. This seems like a large factor in the tension involved when one member, usually the husband, converts to orthodoxy while the others don't. It feels like the demands of Orthodox life clash with all other aspects of family life, such that it is exceedingly difficult to be faithful to both. Orthodox practice is likely to strike an unenthusiastic spouse as weird and self-indulgent, and nerdy husband being nerdy. Just a hunch, but suspect the inch or the INTJ personality types, same as mine, are dramatically overrepresented amongst American converts to Orthodoxy. Now, I've seen this before, and obviously this man is educated in certain spheres, but what I did was I went ahead and seen this particular measurement of, I think it's Myers and Briggs type. This is, just look this up, Google search, and this brings up a chart where Myers and Briggs assesses psychology. Now, some of these have also carried over to like your corporate types, like you're getting a job, they can assess you where your personality is. And what he says is that he falls under this, the innovative, this section here, INTJ, the innovative, independent, strategic, logical, reserved, insightful, driven by their own original ideas to achieve improvements. And this is very much a person who can be very, very analytical as well. So this type of personality, he says, is what he sees in his own experience, and I have seen as well, that tends to grip the person looking or exploring tradition, that wants something deeper, even more rigorous. So he says, orthodoxy is basically an entire lifestyle transplant, which in some ways sounds great, but that inevitably clashes with the lifestyle of the rest of your family if they don't immediately get on board with you. When I have talked about this kind of thing with clergy, the general message is along the lines of, don't worry, just focus on your own spiritual life and they'll be drawn toward the church. In my experience, most other cases I've seen, I have not found this to be the case at all. It seems rather like pouring more fuel on the fire. Now, I'm telling you guys something right now. Again, my anecdotal experience that's matching with his. I know of people in real life and through the internet that this is absolutely set ablaze to their household. And it's unfortunate because when people come to orthodoxy of this certain personality, they sometimes dig in, and especially if they share a militant atheist background who's come to the Lord even through Eastern Orthodoxy, it's very become an all or nothing proposition. This is sad to say, that they have come to sort of elevate the church as a god. And I'm saying this is why I'm cautioned. When I was speaking to people of this background, when I speak to people online, when they tell me they find Eastern Orthodoxy, if they're not ortho bros, I say go in peace. And if you want to hang out here and talk about some of the theological issues, or you want to know why I'm not Orthodox, we could chat about it. But in general, go in peace. Because what ends up happening is when they start to figure out that they've created a God, which is the church, and then they come to see clearly that there are some issues, meaning no history has it perfect. There's no perfect tradition. It begins to crack their belief, their faith. And if they get pressed to a place where they'd have to really deal with deep theological questions, I have seen them in cases not pressed by me. No way. I'm not doing that. And they've left the faith altogether. And why? Because the pride in which they entered some of these traditions, and this happens in Catholicism and evangelicals as well. Okay, so don't think that this is isolation here. But this heavily, especially this latest movement online, is it's either got to be true whole through and through, or Christianity is false and therefore I'm leaving. So I caution you folks that when you're talking to these guys online, or even if you've already figured out what I've said to be true, or these other channels that we've co-opted when we started this deal, and what we co-opted in is that something's not adding up, that there's no perfect tradition. And if you're going to go to a tradition, you have to do it based on the merits of the doctrine and how it ties to the apostolic tradition. And if you've been convinced that this is the richest and purest, go in peace. But if you find yourself fighting with somebody and you can clearly see that they're not equipped and that it's probably not going to end up in a good place, you should probably ease off the gas and say, hey, brother, listen, you're a Christian, I'm a Christian. Even if you think I'm going to hell, I still see you as a Christian. I think the conversation's enough's enough now. Let it go. We don't want that happening. Now, of course, if they come and they want the smoke and they bring the heat, then that's up to you. But you rarely find that people can actually, when they dig down to it, look in the mirror, meaning in the tradition, and actually be honest of to the hits and misses. So this brother goes on to say, when I've talked about this kind of thing with clergy, the general message, I went back here. It says, in my experience, most cases I've seen, I've not found this to be the case at all. Seems rather like pouring more fuel on the fire. If you stop watching TV, playing video games, listening to music, and just want to go to church half a dozen times a week, this rarely impresses your family. It just makes them think you're going crazy. And of course, far less fervent than the sort of behavior, but the tension is still there. In my own life, I often feel like the pursuit of my Orthodox faith and pursuit of my family are in constant conflict with each other. To be a good Orthodox Christian, I have to devote more time to long prayers and reading and going to church, which takes time away from my family. To give my family care and attention usually requires me to do that instead of church stuff. And the tension is there right from when I wake up in the morning, when I try to find time for morning prayers, in between the other family chaos, I get pulled into conflicting directions, resulting in a sort of emotional tug of war where I vacillate back and forth between one or the other periodically and end up constantly feeling emotionally and spiritually drained. Now, I'll just say something to be fair here, because I'm going to give pushback to when the brother's making a point. That can happen in all sorts. Catholicism, evangelicals, and they're going to say less because of the devotion. That's not true. This happens to a lot of people, a lot of Christians. So he's not alone. But it seems to be at a very deeper level, because he told you the sort of responsibility he felt he took upon when he entered into orthodoxy. So it says, in all honesty, I'm not really sure that God is more pleased with the monk on Mount Athos sitting in his room all day trying real hard to experience the uncreated light than he is with the well-intentioned evangelical lady who holds many mistaken beliefs and maybe has some sinful habits, but instead of spending all day spiritually navel glazing, faithfully serves in a crisis pregnancy center, counseling scared and anxious girls not to get an abortion, or caring for homeless people at a shelter, or whatever. Well put. This is what happens constantly when I say this, and I say it in a loving manner, and this is not to Eastern Orthodoxy. This is to the Ortho bros. This is to this culture. I say they come and they spy out our freedom. And what they do is they spy out the freedom that we have as Christians not to live in, let's say, more Pharisaical state. And they sit there and they see that what's transpiring is a more, how should we say, innocent, even spiritual milk. But indeed, on the other side, more grown and mature in the word and basic Christian practices. This happens a lot. And it's not us holier than thou. It's because we're pulling up trying to make the simple as simple it can be and try to live it out. That's what we do at the Truth Cartel. We ain't nobody special. We're regular people trying to say that we can't figure it out on our own. So we come together with brothers. We encourage those people to go to church. They find their local church. They're there, and then parachurch outside. They're with us, and therefore they're a part of our church. We're a part of the church. We all are. And that drives them crazy. Now, it doesn't drive Eastern Orthodox crazy or Catholics that are busy living their lives. It drives this particular programmed internet type of activity. So he makes a point. Is God more pleased with that person that's with their heart seeking to do the will of God or loving their neighbor as themselves? So he says, does it actually work? A big factor in my disillusionment with evangelicalism was that its practices, often vaguely defined and squishy, did not work. Sorry, excuse me. Now, give credit here. If you were to compare what he's already described to evangelicalism, right, and his disillusionment with what he's seeing, hey, let's just chalk it up. From that perspective, we can totally relate what he's talking about on the surface, but not when you get into deeper, more solid men of God and those that have been in the faith longer. That's not what you get. But on the surface, absolutely right. Proper way to see it. Let's say the defined squishy, sort of did not work for him. It didn't have rapturous experiences of God and silly pop concert worship, and the rhetorical performances by charismatic preacher man made no difference at all in my spiritual life and didn't bring me closer to God. It's not for everybody. I never regretted leaving the evangelical world and harbor no sentimental attachment to its antics. Now, what I'll do is I'll push back because there's a lot of people that pull up to your parish or would go to, let's say, a mass, and they're not drawn by your service either, right? So to each their own. But there's millions upon millions of people that devote themselves to church on Sunday and, of course, on Wednesday or Bible study that are completely happy serving the Lord there. So, hey, more power to you. It says, but 6 years into Orthodoxy, I'm not sure that it works either. I have never had much of a hang-up with praying to saints or the Mother of God or icons or relics or holy water and blessed bread and all that. I found all the explanations of these things pretty reasonable and nothing at all like the caricatures presented by evangelical rhetoric. Sorry, excuse me. But if I'm being completely honest, I can't say that I've experienced those things making much of a difference. Holy water and lighting candles at church did not save my mother from pancreatic cancer. Praying to the Mother of God has not helped my marriage or family. My day doesn't seem to be noticeably better or worse based on whether I do a lot of prayers, a few prayers, or no prayers. Now, I want to point out, remember when I told you earlier that if certain people already struggled with their sort of personality or their mindset about how you approach the Lord or Christ, this plays out. Now, this man doesn't talk about him being an atheist before, but you can see right here what he's describing. He is now starting to doubt his faith. Not that he's canceling or leaving. I'm not saying that. I'm saying this is a form of doubt that creeps in, where now nothing seems to be working. It says, obviously, none of these things are like magic spells guaranteeing a particular result. And it's possible that if I wasn't doing all these things, it would be dramatically worse. I have no way of knowing that for sure. To make matters worse, fasting, a vitally important part of Orthodox life, has led to nothing but negatives for me. I'm cranky, lower energy during fasting periods, and having to juggle the demands of trying to prepare fasting compliant meals for myself is just one more thing to deal with. I'm not good at fasting anyway. So this is just one more area where being Orthodox has just introduced more stress and complexity to an already challenging life situation. It wouldn't be such a big deal if my wife was Orthodox, making fasting food. And it wouldn't make a big deal if my wife was Orthodox, making fasting food, and I didn't really have to think about it. But once again, I feel like I'm trying to swim upstream of everyone else in my family. For that matter, doing Orthodox stuff does not feel like it has brought me closer to Jesus. Now, I want to point out something. I believe this is the second time that he has mentioned Jesus. I'm not knocking it. It's not a cheap shot. What I'm trying to say is and point out is this is in my experience with dealing with people for years. And this can even happen in the Tradcast circles and Protestant circles. When they go super high church, they begin to make the church their God. Now I can't make this claim here, but this is what I've assessed in my experience. And he says this, I don't feel like I love Jesus more than I did as an evangelical. This still feels me like such an abstract and arbitrary statement with no frame of reference to my own feelings about anything. If I'm being really frank, my experience of Christianity has always been accepting facts that I believe are true and trying to act accordingly, rather than motivated by warm, fuzzy feelings towards Jesus. Reading books like Wounded by Love feels perplexing and discouraging because I'm seeing the thoughts of someone who actually loves Jesus. Now, this is one of the things that I've noticed. In fact, I have DMs from a person who was going back and forth with the inquiry of the church. And this is exactly where they could pinpoint that something had changed. Again, this is my experience. It's not for Eastern Orthodox. Plenty of Jesus-loving Eastern Orthodox and Catholics, okay? But this juggling of noticing that Christ in some way had taken the focal point, it had become less of the focal point of loving or relating to them. It was not something that was pressed upon them through the normal sense that they'd have grown up in. And he says it's easy to criticize orthodoxy from the outside as a series of ritualistic hoops to jump through that creates a feeling of accomplishment. But the fact that there are plenty of people who get the fuzzy Jesus feelings, but the fact is that there are plenty of people who get the fuzzy Jesus feelings in orthodoxy. That is true. It's what I just said. Closely related to this, the lofty goals of orthodoxy, like achieving theosis, not only feel out of reach, they're things that, if I'm really honest, I don't really care much about or feel to be motivating factors. All the talk about hesychasm and experiencing the divine energies seems almost laughably irrelevant to me and my circumstances. I just want to survive another day without blowing my stack because I had to work a full-time job and do multiple loads of laundry, feed the kids at least one meal all by myself, go grocery shopping, mow the lawn, bathe, and put the kids to bed, and then do some more cleaning up. A long-term lack of correlation between doing orthodox stuff and positive outcomes has considerably dampened my enthusiasm for them. Now, to be fair, this is not isolated to orthodoxy. This can happen in life, period. This isn't to say that I think there's no merit to it. It's all a waste of time, or it's all a waste of time. But at least in my personal experience, I've been a bit disappointed in how it's all played out. And I feel like the benefits are heavily overstated. Now, this has also been a common what we're about to get to next. For some, particularly these more, let's say, assertive, but more introverted kind of thinkers that he falls under, this is one of their staples that I've heard a couple times over. I'd probably say a half dozen times. Okay? This is their commonality, one of the huge benefits. And remember, introverted is typically the personality. I mean, I'm not saying they don't speak at all, but they really want to speak about something that they've researched, come at it, very, very philosophically. So confession is king. In an effort to focus on something positive for a change, I'll point out that the confession remains one of the best things about being Orthodox. It fills a gaping hole for which no solution exists in evangelicalism, and it creates a venue for close-up pastoral care from clergy. Now, this is right here just where I'm going to say is a straw man or is a false caricature of, let's say, evangelicalism. If you're told in your church, and I get confession in Eastern Orthodoxy is a regular practice, and they have confession, or in Catholicism, the confession, you can pull up there throughout the church. But if you have proper elders and pastors, you are going to have conversations with their pastor. And in fact, one of the better pastors that I've ever met in my life who's now since retired, you could get a meeting with him. He was a very busy guy, but he had, I would say, probably at least in his men's group and then the other pair groups that he had at least 24 people that he was pouring into on a regular. But then he had elders that you could come have a conversation with and confess to. So I think a lot of times when we talk about evangelicalism, it can seem like this is not something that they encourage, or you can actually have conversations with elders or staff, but it is there. But I understand his point of view that it's not pushed as a regular open practice in the let's say in the congregation or at the church. You don't see a slide for that. It says, although at this point it feels like it's rather beyond the skill of clergy to solve all my problems via counseling or confession at bare minimum, it's evident that they actually care for me, and that certainly it's worth something. Likewise, I have much more of a sense of shared community life experience with friends and other congregants that I have ever experienced in the highly subjective world of evangelicalism. Now that I'll give him. If he's finding that there, that's good. But there's plenty of churches where some people feel disconnected as well, and even in the evangelical world, because they become, mega churches or whatever the case is. But a lot of them, to be honest with you, have people that don't take advantage of their other groups that meet throughout the week. And in fact, that's what the Truth Cartel is all about. Not only just studying the word and argumentation, but we talk about things in general throughout the day and throughout the week that keeps folks and men focused on what they're doing, and then find a camaraderie and brothers that they can pull up to and confess to. And we have elders, and you can speak to them. And this is something that we highly encourage, because we understand that your church might be challenged in this way. But it says, he says, likewise, unlike previous experiences at evangelical churches, such as the one I attended in the mid-2000s, very little of my negativity stems from specifically bad experiences at my parish, where I've had overwhelmingly positive and good relationship with clergy and the congregants. This is a significant, probably underrated factor in all of this. Despite representing perhaps the most hardcore and traditionalist vein of orthodoxy, one where I sometimes feel myself at odds, my parish mostly has a warm and comfortable social environment rather than a harsh and controlling one. In terms of what I believe on paper, I still think, and I want you to pay attention to something, I still think orthodoxy makes the most persuasive argument for being the true church and has essentially the correct theology and set of beliefs. Wondering if the Roman Catholics or the Lutherans or, God forbid, the Calvinists have things right simply doesn't keep me up at night. Did you hear it again? There's the Calvinist shot. And I want to point something out, because in Ortland's and Pajot's conversation, this kept coming up as Jonathan was really, really irate against I think he was a Baptist Calvinist or, back in the day. And he kept pointing out that the Council of Jerusalem was going against Calvinism and kept saying how bad it was. Now, I'll say this, that this is in some cases a good majority of these people that came over, yes. But I want to point out, what Jonathan and what other Calvinists, ex-Calvinists that had come over, let's say gone to other beliefs or to the Orthodox Church, is what they're trying to say is they can't believe that God has confined so many people to hell. And I'll get to that in a second, because this brought up an interesting conversation with me and another brother. It says, but on the other hand, I found the rigorous views less convincing. Pay attention, chat. I want to show you something. The rigorous views are what we've been discussing. Right now, I've been showing and sort of going over and sharing with others what I call the broken ark argument, or what people will say is the Eastern Orthodox dilemma. And that is, the rigorists are the anti-ecumenist. And then you have the ecumenist. So the current church right now, with the patriarchs and the recent Pan-Orthodox Council in the last 10 years, and the view of the last 100 years, and the sprouting up of another movement called True Orthodoxy, they all point that the Orthodox Church is in sin. They're in violation. That the patriarchs are actually out of touch. And they are indeed following a satanic movement. This is the verbiage that I've heard from Eastern Orthodox. And in fact, some of your favorite guys like Jay Dyer say that these people are corrupt. So these people who are saying, no, we're extending our hands to Catholics and Orthodox and calling them heterodox brothers, meaning not in the fullness of the truth, but still holding on to the essentials and still call them in Christendom Christian churches and confessions, the rigorous say, hell no, they are not. And we disagree with our church. So this brother is about to agree, and he has the same sentiment. And this I found with somebody who's been Orthodox for 5 years or so. In other words, a seasoned Orthodox ends up right here in this tension. Watch this. But on the other hand, I find the rigorous views less convincing. In other words, this whole idea that everybody's going to hell if they're not EO, I don't think so. I don't think everybody outside the Orthodox Church is doomed to undifferentiated darkness. And I'm less convinced of the very hardline perspectives represented in ROCOR. Now, I'll point out to you that ROCOR is under the Moscow Patriarchate. And they indeed are the ones that kicked off this more modernist view. So the ROCOR, although you have some hardcore rigorists in that movement, in the end, their leadership, their patriarchate, is actually one that's very much for the ecumenist movement. So he's in ROCOR, who has some hardcore people in it, but essentially the overall leadership is not hardcore. So he has concluded with this church and disagrees with the rigorists. This is huge because most mature Eastern Orthodox, and I don't say that as a slight, is after a while, this wears off. They're like, bro, I know Catholics that have the Spirit of God in them. I know evangelicals and Protestants that are seeking the Lord and love the Lord, and I cannot say that they're not saved. I can't. And I know you think it. My church may have said it, but I can't say it. He goes on to say, although I consider myself very conservative, theologically and otherwise, I found myself very put off by the internal politics and associations in ROCOR, scandals and mishandling associated with them of the jurisdiction. If I moved to a different geographic location, I really don't know if I'd go to another ROCOR parish instead of OCA or something. Remember, I talked about this. This is where essentially they can move on if they wanted to. Now, others tell us that no, they have to get the permission of their current parish to even go to OCA. There's different answers on this. The point is, same thing. If they felt like it, they could pick somewhere that aligns with their beliefs. Now, he goes on to talk a little bit about here. He says, I can often feel like the eagerness of hardliners and converts calling for the immediate canonization of Father Seraphim Rose reflects a hasty approach and is more motivated by the urge to legitimize the perspectives and biases behind a canonized American origin saint. So in other words, he says that there's hasty movements going on in the church. Right? I'm going to skip past this because he just talks about the certain movement that he thinks is infecting the church, that it might be a little bit more, Western or California or liberal. He says, I've noticed that a lot of people on online space get really hung up with particular things. Watch this, and this is where you're going to see the cognitive dissonance happening. One I see come up over and over is whether orthodoxy actually teaches basically the Western notion of original sin. For some reason, to be frank, I just don't care much about these nitpicky arguments that involve endless cult mining of this church father and that. These strike me as the mental antics of nerds who can't sit still without needing to constantly find something to nerd out about. My personal hangups and struggles are almost entirely practical issues, rather than specifically theological ones. Now, this blows my mind. Because remember, what we're told is evangelicals, he sees them as being way off with their theology. And one of the things that they leave is Calvinism, because they find it hard to believe that a Calvinistic God could lead so many people to hell. Now I'm going to present to you the dilemma that they have. And secondly, I'm going to treat this particular argument that he's just brought up, okay? That he says, I'm not really concerned with these nitpicking things. Well, this is so far from what he should be saying, considering that he left Calvinism. And one of the mainstays, one of the actual debates stems from this very topic of original sin. The anthropology of man, how sin affects, this is everything. This is upstream or creates the downstream effect of tulip, of the Calvinistic doctrines. So the fact that he would just float past that and act like, not a big deal, that is the deal. So what do we have? What we have is this sort of partial view or a blinder that they have to deal with in this particular church. For instance, in Decree 16 of the Confession of Dositheus in the Council of Jerusalem, it states explicitly that those babies that are not baptized end up where? Doesn't say heaven or another place. It says those that are not baptized end up where? They're not baptized, they don't enter heaven. Now you can have a discussion where whether that's hell, real hell, some other kind of Sheol or whatever it may be. But do you see that this question ends up begetting the real question, the logical entailment that their church on the one hand proclaims one thing about original sin, which leads to a certain doctrine, that therefore the reason that they left Calvinism is actually a big problem that's stated in their particular tradition. That if it is true that unbaptized babies or even children end up in a place that's not heaven, then therefore God, no fault of their own, has consigned them to the same thing that Calvinists does to the Calvinistic God. Do you not see it, chat? This is pretty simple. Now, some of these problems, they're just going to go, I don't really want to deal with them. And that's fine if you don't want to. I'm not going to press the envelope. But what you're not going to do is plank in my eye. That's what you're not going to do. And you're not going to tell me that your church is not rigorous and ecumenist, rigorous, depending on what century. Hogwash. Understand that what's happening in this debate is that you need to know what this man is saying and accurately and really ask deeper questions. For him just to float past this like nothing really is a big issue. That means you can be in this 5 years, 6 years, and not even know what was staring at you in the face is possibly something that you're going to have to deal with and explain away through your soteriologies, through your view of God, through how you see God interacting with creation. He goes on to say, over the last 6 years, there's been an explosion of rhetoric for and against orthodoxy online, as this is where most of the movement has been again. Out of all the evangelicals I've known in my life, I don't know any others to convert to orthodoxy or show any interest. Various Protestants have tried to make rebuttals against orthodoxy, but when I see things like the slickly produced but hollow failure of Eastern Orthodoxy, watch, I want you to pay attention how he essentially contradicts himself. Watch this. This is the biggest what? He says he's watching these videos of, let's say, I don't know, Catholics or evangelicals doing the failure of orthodoxy. The arguments just aren't convincing. Watch this, chat, especially when they try to argue things like the Orthodox downplaying the seriousness of sin. What? He just said it, chat. Now I want to tell you how he's now just not assessing properly what he's told us. He told us that when he went from evangelicalism over to Eastern Orthodoxy, things didn't change at all. In fact, some things got worse. He was talking about his sin. Then he goes on to see that evangelicals say, hey, it's sounding very law-focused or pharisaical. And he was like, I hate to say it, but that's true. Then he comes down here and I watch these videos where people tell you, well, the problem with orthodoxy is the seriousness of sin. Then he face palms, he says. Think about it. But that's literally what he's admitted already. He says, our facepalm moments like misunderstanding the altar of an Orthodox church as remaking the Holy of Holies. Much of the rhetoric is easily recognized as just incorrect when you've spent a few years going to the services, hearing the prayers, and living the life of being inside the church. When you hear Protestants in damage control mode make psychological statements that are obviously contradicted by what you've heard a million times in church or prayed from your prayer book, you don't need to be a theological expert or memorize dozens of patristic quotes to know that they're wrong. Now, I'll just say this. It goes both ways, pal. Okay? I've heard people not be able to articulate something like sola scriptura accurately. I've even heard him making mistakes here on what he thinks, about certain churches. So it goes both ways. But don't tell us that people talking about the seriousness of sin is not an issue, because this is what comes up in this online movement of ortho bros. To me, this is more relevant point than getting lost in the weeds of scripture foo or patristic judo. Although sometimes Orthodox apologists can overstate their case, I still think the evidence strongly favors the Orthodox position, especially when it comes to ongoing developments like archaeological textual evidence for the early veneration of icons. Well, there's a lot of people that disagree with that, especially when you make the veneration of icons salvific. All right, so we're about to finish up here, chat. I want to check in with the chat. Have you found what's being said here as something that you have experienced directly, maybe as an inquirer, an ex-EO, or that you have seen in other people's lives? Chat, is this something you've seen personally, what he's been describing thus far? Because if there's an online boom, you got to know some people, maybe even in real life, where what he's describing, they came to. Now, some of us, probably more than others in online circles, yes or no, chat. Bao says uno. That's yes. Chat, anybody else? Have you seen this happening? And if not, it's okay. You might still be talking to people who have been in the church a couple years. He's been in the church for 5 or 6. He talks to us about that right now in a second here. So he's going to tell us how long he was a catechumen. And he says that's another thing, that his parish may have dropped the ball. I think he was only a catechumen for like 6 months. From the perspective, my mind told I need to meet a standard and feel crazy. Okay. I've never met him. Well, that's also common in real life. Like I said, 2 that I know of. One of them's experiencing this pretty heavily. Nobody told me that. Oh, okay, so here it is. Here's the bombshell. Sorry, let's start back up here. Looking back, I don't feel my parish or priest really handled my conversion that great. I started coming in July of 2020 and was baptized less than 6 months later. Now, to be fair, the Eastern Orthodoxy explosion didn't happen to like 2021 in the middle of the pandemic and it went up to like 2022 or 2023 and it's come down. In other words, the movement is kind of not dying, but it's slowing down. So the point is, back then, they didn't know what it was like to get a bunch of people in. So they might have had a quicker turnaround, meaning, hey, let's get them baptized quicker. So he says he was baptized less than 6 months later. I didn't have a lot of catechism. The priest seeming to think that my own self-study was basically sufficient. They didn't seem to worry about whether my wife was interested or not, or whether I was really prepared. There was a lot that nobody went over with me. For instance, I didn't know about the frankly over-the-top member handbook on the parish website. Watch this, chat. Nobody told me all of the various sex rules, which I was left to find out on my own over the next few years. I don't know what that's about, but I guess they would have rules of what's going on in the bedroom between husband and wife.
Hey, yo!
I don't know. Now, I'm not saying that's horrible, but I'm saying is he didn't know about it. He says, to be blunt, I don't think they should have baptized me when they did. I should have been made to be a catechumen for at least a year and should have received much clearer practical instruction on what day-to-day life was going to be like. Remember, he just told us that his best part is that currently living in the parish environment, meaning interacting, is the best thing about it. They're so nice. But now he's telling them that they didn't do a good job. He says, rather than reading about mystical theology or whatever. On the bright side, the whole catechumen program seems to have been entirely overhauled and it's much more robust from what I can tell. So this may be less of an issue now. But I can't help but feel like my parish didn't exercise much discretion in junking myself and 24 other people at almost the earliest possible convenience. Maybe some of that can be chalked up to everyone feel like the sociocultural world was ending in the midst of COVID mania. But the situation still rubs me the wrong way looking back. I hate to sound so negative, but my overall mood 6 years in is one of weariness. The Orthodox experience stopped being fun for me a long time ago, and increasingly feels like it's wearing on me and those around me. Now, let me go ahead and drop the link here for you guys, because we're wrapping up at least the letter here. Let's see if you want to pull up and see if you what your take is, what you agree on, or what you struck and what struck a chord with you, and let's see if we can get your takes as you come up and pinpoint kind of what stood out to you. It says, I feel often burned out, and the way forward feels increasingly unclear. My personal and family life is taxing, and orthodoxy seems to be adding to that. So let me just say something. This right here, just this term, and he said it like 2 or 3 times. This right here. So I told you that I know of people, and the one person who told me this used the same word, said it was taxing, and he said he felt a weight. Now, this person is still Eastern Orthodox, by the way, and I haven't spoken to him probably in a year and a half, maybe. But that's what he said. But this makes me sad, chat. It makes me sad because this is something that we would see to be maybe self-inflicting, because other Eastern Orthodox I've met don't feel this way. But he goes on to say this, should you convert, oh, this is the end, yeah. Should you convert? I'm definitely not telling you that you shouldn't. But what I hope is that some of my experiences might help inquirers work through issues that I didn't consider or know about 6 years ago, and avoid diving into the world of orthodoxy with excessively rose-colored glasses. Having a more measured set of expectations going in would benefit everyone involved. And when he means everyone, he really means his family. In other words, wife, children, so on and so forth. For those of you, I'm going to go ahead and drop the link, and I don't think I did, so I apologize, in the description. So if you want to go back, but if not, you can just pull this up on a Substack where you asked me where this was, so you can read it yourself and go through it. Edwin Robinson. I've been Orthodox for 5 years now. How am I feeling now? Or sorry. So, anyways, that's the end, chat. I want to see if you guys have a question in the chat. If you want to pull up, let me drop the link again, and let me get your guys' 2 cents as I pull you up to tell me what you think is best and get your time to shine here in your analysis. There's a link. Let's do that, because I think it's important to put in proper context that there's things that you have to assess in going to any faith or committing yourself. Instead of what? Instead of a letter, it should be a phone call to see if they're sick. Okay. I don't know what you're talking about. Oh, you guys are talking back and forth here. All right. So go ahead and click the StreamYard here. We could only press God's through grace. Every Wednesday's renewal is submitting. That's fact. Now, I want to talk to you guys just a little bit about this last part. But this whole ex-Calvinist thing, like I said, I was talking over with a couple brothers. And you really have to assess that if you left Calvinism to go to Eastern Orthodoxy, that you really have to deal with the sort of idea that you've gone to another assuming you're exclusivist, or in other words, you're not following your church. You're a rigorist. And therefore, by technicality, you have joined a church where God has, by leaps and bounds, I'm saying by the numbers, has confined people, meaning all Protestants and Catholics over the centuries, has confined more people to hell by the billions. Now, I'm not saying he did it. There was their own choice to go that way. But even if you add the babies in there who can't make the choice, there's a lot more people ending up in hell. And ironically, sometimes I'm hearing people that they left Calvinism because it sent too many people to hell. Just pointing it out. Now, I know it's more complex than that, but I'm just saying. And there's people that, of course, will say it's biblical and they love it. Yeah, to go, but here's the argument. From going from an Augustinian doctrine, right, is according to some of their councils, especially the Council of Jerusalem, the more recent one going against Calvinism, they have a problem in that theology in some of their statements. Now, I want to say this, that they will pretend that it's not a big deal, or you're going to get a different, how should I say it? You're going to get a different interpretation. So let me show you this. Maybe we'll look at that if anybody wants to come up, click the link and pull up. Let me show you the language that I'm talking about. And this is just part of it. But this is why in speaking to others, they start to talk about how they're not so far from Protestant or quote unquote Augustinian or Calvinistic soteriology in certain senses. This is Decree 16 of this synod that's universally accepted. Okay. Let me back out so we get a complete view of the text. Sorry. All right. So particularly here in the baptism of infants. Okay. So I guess I'll just start here. Whoever is not born again, this is the same as saying all that after the coming of Christ the Savior would enter into the kingdom of the heavens must be regenerated. And since infants are men and as such need salvation, therefore the baptism, right? Baptism is what saves. We know that Eastern Orthodoxy and Catholicism need such salvation. Needing salvation, they need also baptism. And those that are not regenerated, since they have not received the remission of hereditary sin, are of necessity subject to eternal punishment, and consequently cannot without baptism be saved. Now you're going to get different people trying to change and sugarcoat it. I can pull up a person who considers themselves to be the true Orthodox, and they'll come in and tell you that Augustinian theology, the original sin view, that there's a modern contemporary reinterpretation of not only this council, but of church history of how they see original sin. In other words, they'll argue that it's very much, according to this council, exactly like what Augustinian Catholics or Calvinists seem to be dealing with in their soteriology eventually, or the anthropology of man and sin and how it infects certain or infects man, and then how it works through certain practices like baptismal regeneration. It's just a fact. These are things that you have to struggle with. Now, I'm not a Calvinist. I believe in free will. I don't believe in the strict, pedal baptismal regeneration idea. I believe that all those that are innocent, or, a view of say more partially with the Catholics. Remember, as a Catholic, you can have sort of both views. But anyways, let's do this. Let's bring up my free grace brother who needs to repent from another mother. Oh, whoa. I didn't want to cancel you. That was my cancel me. Here he is. Is this the... Wait a minute. Hold on. Can I get you even on screen here? Do I got you hidden? Give me a second. Give me a second. Don't say anything. I don't know. I think it was you. There you are. The Layman Seminary. All right, brother. So we went through this, and I appreciate you hanging with some of it. You might have read that already. What were your thoughts, and what are some of the points that jumped out at you?
Well, I haven't read this article yet, but I do want to read it. I did listen to it while I was at work, driving home. I think sociologically and psychologically, it was a good window into things. There's some things that he said theologically I wonder about. It's like, if First Corinthians says that if you get saved, your wife can go the other direction, and he's using the word conversion, right. But it's like have your wife on board before you convert, and it's like that to me just sounds like a wrong approach, because even if she converts, that doesn't mean that she's going to be on board. I mean, because that's what happens in Baptist churches all the time. Somebody believes, but they're not involved. In fact, Baptist churches and other churches as well, they're always trying to get men involved, come back to church, because men dropped out because they associate Sunday school class with women's class, stuff. I'm going through a John Eldridge study right now, Wild at Heart or something, and it's that man type stuff, and it's like Andrew Tate's gone, Jay Dyer's still there, he's still doing his thing, but I mean,
I would call it more of a red pill, though. That's kind of dying off, that aspect. And you got to ask yourself. I'm not knocking him, but I don't know that Jay Dyer. He's married, but I don't know that he has the classic family and kids, or if he has any children. I don't think he does. But I could be wrong. I'm not knocking him for it. I'm simply saying is playing that out as a person who could give advice to young men would be only from a certain angle or a certain perspective, and might be lacking. So. But I think in his article, he basically pointed that out, that the online personality only takes you so far, and then you got to deal with the realism. And that's sort of the dynamic that you're explaining. Because if what you're saying, Layman, is that, yeah, you're right. So then I would have to take the approach, then, dang, I can't become Orthodox because I don't think my wife's enthusiastic like I am.
Yeah, I don't think that you should not put your wife or your family before God. Right. And he felt like he was doing the other extreme. But him saying, you shouldn't convert unless your wife, like, well, I mean, no. How do you worship God? Because this is the thing. If their view of salvation is correct, then what he's saying is I'd rather choose Eve instead of being with God. So we right back to the garden.
Yeah, in a sense. But here, let me you pointed something out that I was going to get to outside of the council to see. You know what you pointed out?
What?
That he is through and through, and he said it, an ecumenist. So his wife is still Christian.
Okay.
And from that point of view, then what it is this tradition switch is more of him sort of lamenting and going back to say, was this worth it? And if he is an ecumenist, therefore he thinks there's salvation in the Catholic tradition or in the evangelical, Protestant tradition. You see it? If he has that view, then this is not that big of a deal, and he clearly has that view.
But then he disagrees with his church.
No, he doesn't. Not
a
his
branch
current
of his church.
Okay. No, not so. Right now, we could say that what the rigorist or what true Orthodox, these guys that have their own side, they say you guys are cowards because your current church is the current church, the Eastern Orthodox Church, World Orthodoxy is an ecumenist church.
Yeah, it's watered down.
Exactly. So
it's sort of like John Paul did the Catholic Church,
Yes. So it's their Vatican II. Through the Council of Crete, through their patriarchs, through the movement that's happening through OCA and these other churches. Now, let's say something like the Hardcore or Rocore, or let's say what is I think it's the Romanian church that's a little more hardcore. I forget which one is really hardcore. But the point is, there's a movement pushing against them, but overwhelmingly their church is ecumenist. So he's going with his church, but that's not even it. Most people over time, when they're Eastern Orthodox, don't take this approach. They actually go, no, bro, I think you're a brother. I want you to come in the fullness of faith, but I'm not on that. These are the mature ones. 5 years or more sound like him. The guys less, oh man, this is a real problem. And so if he sees it that my wife is still Christian in that tradition, and if I would go back 5-6 years, and because I'm not a rigorist, then I would say, bro, that's a much easier way to go, and maybe some other way you can convince her in. Maybe that would be the advice. He didn't give all that. But you make a good point, though, in terms of if you're seeing it, you could see it as him going, well, he's choosing Eve over the Lord. I see your point. And that's a good point.
Yeah, I mean, it's a complex issue. Like I said, it's a window into things. I'm debating a true Orthodox guy. It's one of the ones that you and JP had on.
You talking about the father
Saturday.
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
I don't know his name. I can't remember. But I'm debating him Saturday.
I think it's Father Joseph. I think is his first name Joseph?
I think so. I think it's him.
Yeah. Okay. Whose channel are you doing it on?
Layman Apologist. So what happened is he tagged in layman apologist, I think, and to moderate, and so they know each other. Layman apologist is a Irish guy, I think.
What's the topic?
And free grace biblical. So
Oh, okay.
I mean, yeah.
Well, repent. All right, so that's going on Saturday. Anything else to add? I don't know if anybody. I don't really see anybody in the back. Somebody popped in and left. But I'll drop the link again.
Well, I mean, I hope they'll come up there, but the reality is they might be scared. They might be scared to take a side or even go against this because it's so polarizing.
Yeah, I think it's reality. To me, I've always known this, but people would ask me, well, why aren't you? And it took me a while to actually go through the doctrine because it's different. There's certain claims that come down metaphysically that are different than the Catholic Church. Soteriology, then, depending upon what your view is. But as you can see, it's not as straightforward, and it's not the same story, the same doctrine throughout the whole life of the church. That's just, I can conclude that that's false. That's not true. And they're never going to be able to fix this. And I'm not saying like in the future they can't have they can't come together and have an ecumenical council, but it's just not going to happen in our lifetime. So therefore, you have to be an Eastern Orthodox like this brother here who has a wife that apparently doesn't go to the church, it sounds like, and then he's living in this struggle, and he's saying, I would have reassessed it and started with that angle. But that's because he's not an exclusivist. And so that's a big piece of all this. So I hope through this arc, people have come to see the arguments or just the pure facts of Eastern Orthodoxy. I don't know if you've learned some things through this, Layman, watching this whole deal that we started about almost 6 months ago.
Yeah, I definitely see the sociological factors, the vacuum that some of the traditional feeling, and I like, the young restless, the Calvinist connection you were talking about too. It just, what I wonder is, would they have been this far around if they had not adopted this form of precept where it's like, you got before you have a conversation with this, you got to prove your church. It's like, you got what set you claim.
No, they wouldn't have. So that's the irony of this whole thing is that.
So they're taking Calvinistic approaches.
Yeah, they absolutely are. And I'm arguing that if they want to debate it, unless they can pull up somebody who can tell me where an ecumenical council has stated otherwise, okay, you can't be an ecumenist and take the language from the synod or the Council of Jerusalem and come to a conclusion that there's not some issues. There is. Yeah. And I'm not saying they're a full out contradiction because you're going to have maybe the main church going, oh, we don't really believe that anymore. Just like they're taking a softer approach towards the outside Christian world, right? That's what they say. It's the Christian churches. So, bro, this is not going to get handled. But your point is, had somebody not hijacked the let's say the tag argument, basically put at the end of the tag argument, energy's essence distinction, added that on an auxiliary piece, and then spun it out and then went out to sort of trip people up with the classic questions that Protestants really were not fighting. They were basically fighting either Catholics on certain areas, but then it became popular on the internet. No, we wouldn't be dealing with this. We would be dealing with how the church, and you can ask the true Orthodox guy you're going to talk to, and historically how the church has evangelized, if we want to use that word, outside of the Orthodox Church. You know how they evangelize? You know their way of doing it has always been historically, come experience liturgy. Come experience the true
One of
church.
them told me that too.
Exactly.
Like,
that's exactly how they've always done it.
I like Bone Thugs and Harmony, but I'm not going to base my religion on some musical wonderfulness. I've heard the Fatiha recited, and that sounds beautiful. I've heard Hebrew that sounds beautiful. Just because you got a good sound system and a nice air freshener doesn't mean I'm gonna roll in your ride. That's reality.
No, that's facts too. The Arabic, the church there where they do liturgy, the Arabics. Nobody's gonna deny that there's rich history and it's beautiful. I mean, but I couldn't get down with it, and I don't knock them for it. But this idea that if they wouldn't have come with this approach and then had this, epistemology argument where he'd pull up and go, my epistemology is basically showing you're turd. Okay, bro. Well, eventually you're going to have to get past this. And That's exactly what happened. Is
Yeah.
I figured out last year that there's something up with this argument. And I was just like, wait a minute. I just noticed the guy didn't answer the question again. And then I would see debates or people, and I go, bro, these guys don't answer questions. That's why
Yeah.
this whole blow up with Andrew Wilson, the 1-for-1, he's sitting there going, no, don't do it. No 1-for-1. No 1-for-1. Why? Because you could easily just turn it around and not even to quoque it. You just say, bro, we agree. You actually agree with me that this whole time your church and your burning of the bosom is you believe the Holy Spirit told you. But they don't want to get into where that's relativism and it's arbitrary. So what do? They spin a yarn, they do this other move, and they don't answer questions. And then next thing you know, it's about how you didn't answer the question quick enough and they clown you. This is it, bro. That was their playbook.
Who did that?
That's your boy, bro.
Oh, okay. It's a sound effect. Wow. So let me mention this. Okay. I heard Andrew Wilson talking to JP in one of those spaces, and he was trying to say, well, what we want to do is we want each other to cross.
He's trying to clean it up
for an hour. Yeah, but all he's trying to do is he's trying to get you so that he can press his worldview and use the team. He's just trying to get his precept down in. That's all he's trying to do. Right. And the other thing is with this guy, they wrote this article. He was pretty much a first level Orthodox Mason. He didn't know all the other things at the next level until he got into the system. And I've noticed that with Catholics, probably around 2005, I was encountering people that they were appealing to the Protestants so much that they kind of just soft-sold it, soft-served it, however you want to say it. And I was like, I'm not getting to know what the real Catholic Church believes, know?
That's facts.
And that's what I feel like is going on with the Orthodox. And so these guys that are online that go from gamers to warriors now, I mean, it's just...
Or they went from workout bros to ortho bros. They got a lot of testosterone. And what do they want to do? They want to assert their dominance and they want to compete. And none of them should be doing that. They don't have blessings from their church to do it, let alone how they're doing it. It's crazy.
And the OCD angle, I think it's very real because I don't know if you know this. Wilkin had an Orthodox background, and his free grace arguments are designed to undermine orthodoxy.
I didn't know that, bro. Wow.
That's essentially what I've seen. Also, Sean Lazar, who was his right-hand man, that's now he's the one that wrote Lotus, but he came out of that as well. But the other thing is that, oh crap, I forgot what I was gonna say. But
you were talking about some free gracers had EO backgrounds, and then you were trying to get
Wilkin was Serbian, raised around Serbian Orthodox as well as some other extreme holiness movements and stuff like that.
Gotcha.
But there's a saying back in the day. It used to say our worship says our kind of worship says more about us than it does about God. And I think that is so true because what we like to nerd out on or whatever, that describes us a lot of times. But there's a guy that he was reformed. I think he was moving into NCT territory, and I caught up with him a couple years ago, and come to find out he's now Catholic. And I went on his channel and talked to him. Well, I knew that he had certain extreme OCD issues. I mean, like very, very extreme.
Yeah, I come across them too. They're OCDs a lot of times too. Yes, you're right.
Yeah, and so you give them something to do, and some people like to be whipped. Yeah. And you read the Da Vinci Code, and you got the Opus Dei guy that was always whipping himself, and that's what some of these people do, and you can see it across all denominations as well.
Yeah,
there are some people they like to be whipped. They don't. I don't know why. I don't know if it's an S&M thing or what, but the reality is.
Well,
Rihanna said chains and whips exciters, so I don't know. Maybe some of these extreme forms, that's what they're into.
Bro. Well, I wouldn't go that far. Hold on. It says the biggest selling point. What? Was Saint Christopher, the good boy, dog-headed saint. but they don't depict him with the dog head anymore. So I'm a no on EO. Wow. Okay. Is that the wait a minute? Is that's not the saint that actually would speak to pets or whatever? Is that maybe somebody else? Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry if I don't get the inside EO. All right, bro. Well, it doesn't look like people are going to pull up and let's say disagree or agree or give me their take. Somebody, like I said, pulled up and bounced. Anything else you want to finish off with, Layman? And then your debates on Saturday against,
Yeah.
I think Father Joseph from the True Orthodox movement.
Yeah.
Anything
Yeah.
else you want to, any other knowledge you want to drop or anything else that you got from this article?
Well, you know, I'm for decentralization and democracy, and
Okay.
and these other platforms, they've tried to centralize things. The Orthodox Church don't want to be as centralized as the Catholic Church, but they
Right.
still want the decentralization. Yet they use the arguments that the Catholics use against them on the Protestants. So it's like they're trying to do a middle of the road approach. So they're not even as extreme as they want to act. And essentially, what it comes down to is I don't have enough faith to be a Catholic. Frank Turk and them, they put out that book. I don't have enough faith to be an atheist.
Right.
In a way, they don't have enough faith to be a Catholic.
So
Um,
I think that baseline, that he made, that he took the shot, the lowest common denominator, basically mere Christianity,
mhm.
is they find, almost to be offensive if you're that type of Christian. But it's kind of funny how what I noticed in this is he said that things actually got worse when he went, from the evangelical side that way. So
Yeah.
I think there's something to the what you're sold, like you said, and I hate to say it, but it's like a pamphlet that they give you, and the pamphlet's not the real thing. And once
Right.
they get in and they see it, they start to examine all these categories, right? The
Mhm.
tie to salvation primarily, which for you as a free gracer, it's like, bro, that's like you got an encyclopedia. But I'm just saying is for Christians that are not antinomians, right? We're looking
Yeah.
at it like yes, we have work to do per se, right? But
Yeah.
when they look at it as like, no, bro, I got work to do. Like, I got to learn this. I got to get the books. I got to sound like these dudes that I saw online. I got to get this whole persona up. And then they kind of go, what?
It's like a Jehovah Witness.
Every time I leave this world online and I go to my real life, nobody gives a crap about this. And certainly nobody wants to hear it because they roll their eyes. So
Yeah.
it becomes a very, 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 very solitary type mental confinement that they place themselves, not on purpose, but it ends up that way.
Now this will cut against me, but I'll still say it that a lot of times men, because they lack influence in real life, they'll seek it in other areas,
Mm-hmm.
and
Facts.
so these young men, they want to have influence, whatever they want to call it, and this is their channel. But all I got to say is, why don't they be influenced enough to formally debate?
Oh,
You
here we
know,
go. I knew it. I was waiting. I was waiting for it. There it is. Formally debate. All right, my bro. Listen, repent, but I was gonna check out
the
your
debate.
debate on Saturday.
All right.
But I may want you to talk to somebody. Um, he's actually like crazy free grace and somebody you would refute. But I don't know if he's
Okay.
still in the Discord. So I'll just at you so you can pull up because he was saying, I was like, bro, you need to talk to Layman. This was like about 2-3 weeks ago, but I forgot to hit you up about it.
Does
I
he
think
know me?
I think he knows of you, but he's never spoken to you. Because I asked him, I go, bro, you don't
Okay.
know Layman? Layman will come here and smack you because he's basically an antinomian. But
Okay.
he had some other extreme views that I was just like, I don't know. Maybe I did at you. I can't remember, but
All right.
I'll
Well,
let
send
you
me a
know, bro.
message on Discord or whatever.
Yeah, you got it.
All right.
All right, bro. We'll catch you later.
God
Everybody,
bless.
y'all. Say peace out to the free grace or repent. Oh, look at this, Chad. It's that time of the day again? No way, Chad. Look, everybody. It's a nice time to say a prayer for the Truth Cartel. So we have the light coming into the studio once again. Amen. Mahler had a free grace on the panel to attack EO. Rate the retired. I hear about this. Bro, Layman's on here all the time and needs to repent anyway. Yeah, well, if you can't have anybody else. By the way, me saying whether I'll have them up or not, you guys don't understand. The days of them having conversations with me is it's over. It's over. They never will. Okay? After the Andrew Wilson thing, it's done. You can forget that. That's it. They're not doing any of this. So I'll just say this in light of all that, in light of all of what we know and what's transpired in the last, I told this to JP today, in the last 6 months, that we are going to eventually turn to something else. Now, chat, I want to maybe get your ideas, if you would be so kind as to send me in the description of this video is the email, and you could tell me whether we're going to start to shift to something else. I'm going to start to incorporate what we've said from the very beginning, which is the politics of family, faith, and finance. But I really want to get into conversations that bring in other non-believers, atheists, or of other extreme political views that I can tie back and give them the gospel. We're kicking around a bunch of these things. So if anything, actually, I don't think the email's there. Just pull up to the Discord and give me a piece of your mind, maybe in a bad way or maybe in a good way, and tell me where you think, if I've acquired or I have any skills or any sort of form of entertainment that monopolizes or takes over your time, which way you think I should go in certain areas. And I appreciate it. Thank you, brother. Please Mahler allowed a former reform guy in the chat to criticize Orthodox. Yeah, see, Maddie's a reform guy. And what I'm trying to say in all this, if you guys haven't figured it out, is what I'm trying to do is bring unity. I dealt with Tradcast for 2 years. I've dealt with, now this is going on, 6 months officially online, the last year in Discord. So it's been a year and a half of the EOs, right? But what had to change, and it's already dying down, is this idea that you can go around, say, flip your mother, this, that, you're a little this, you're a little that, and then not be able to pull up and give an argument. That's just not going to work anymore. Your church is moving away from this. They think that you guys are toxic and that that's not going to work. So if that's the case, why don't you guys just assimilate, change, and understand that you're going to have to let this go? And like the article showed us, that you're going to have to be a productive Christian showing fruits, right? That befit repentance, and fruits that show that you're actually trying to spread the gospel, whether through it is in word or deed. Should be doing both. I don't think that anybody's against that. Remember, throughout this conversation and this whole ego saga that wrapped in a bunch of people that normally wouldn't be doing this gauntlet stuff, this sort of debate, what we've learned is that there's certain characteristics that people as Christians eventually, even getting through some times where we slip up, I overreact, they overreact, everybody overreacts, or we get in pride, is that the characteristics that are explained to us that are the fruits of the Spirit, right, need to be shown to others. Even if we have to come and repent, say, hey, I shouldn't have engaged in this type of behavior, or I should have done this, or I should have did this better. Everybody's evaluating themselves. But I'll tell you that the absolute marker or the bar is so low that they set for themselves, that I hope this is a period that we mark in, let's say, Christian YouTube era or online era of Christianity, that we look back and we say never again, right? That we had, let's say, a version of the Reform Bros happening, and that wasn't, let's say, quite as vulgar. Even though I told you recently, I saw some crazy Calvinists that were out here cussing more than the EOs and the Tradcast. I was like, yo, bro, what kind of movement is this? But let me just say that if anything, the fruits of the Spirit, and bring back unity. If you are going to be in your hyper-exclusivist circle and you want to go around telling other Christians that your church has said that are in Christendom that they're going to hell, I'll just say this. I hope you're single. I hope you're not a person who actually wants to build a family, get married, have a kid, any kids, a dog, because what you're going to eventually find is that behavior is not conducive to you leading, producing fruit that your family can actually witness in real time. This is a very, very tricky situation. And remember, when you're going to make this move, let it be on the merits of doctrine. Let it be that there's a real fear of God in you that literally says, I must join this church because there's no other true church. But even then, people that join it come to the conclusion, but I still think those people over there can be saved. And I think that guy over there, he has the Holy Spirit and he ain't Eastern Orthodox. How do I put this together? Well, it's because I believe, and I've told you, that the thesis or this movement that started with the Truth Cartel, and we will end, has been that the Holy Spirit, the providence of God, has brought all churches to come confess that the essentials, Jesus is God, therefore Trinity, by grace through faith, and the minimal 66 has placed us into Christendom. And now, after thousands of years, Vatican II, Council of Crete, EOs, and even from the beginning of the Reformation, all Protestants can say, bro, there's Catholics that are Christians, there's Eastern Orthodox that are Christians, and all the smaller traditions, right? So why can't we just conclude that this is what's happening? Still make your pitch that you think you're in the fullness of the faith. But when you see people reacting and snark, I just noticed that I put up gospel preaching videos to people on Roblox and other platforms that I've been on. And they're sitting there going, how stupid is this? I'm literally telling Muslims and atheists the gospel, trying to give them the light that they need. And they sit there and snarky. But you know what I noticed? They got real quiet. People just want to see Christian drama online. And I'm telling you, I'm getting to the point where I cannot serve my purpose in this whole fight by doing just that. So we're going to have to move on. And I hope we do, and I hope you move on with me. So find a way to support the Truth Cartel and what we're doing. It would immensely bless this movement and our Truth Cartel family, me and my wife, for you to be a part of it. Because remember, we're in dark times. Some say the end times. And I'm just wondering if you've held on to Christ as your Lord and you've come to accept him. Because in these times, as I always tell you, it's real dark these days, but it doesn't matter what tomorrow brings, because you know I will serve the King.
The Truth Cartel, trafficking truth to the world.